Hello, you beautiful people, and welcome back to another video. So, y'all might have heard about those new Dendro leaks coming up. You know, where when they mix Hydro, they start a garden, and when they mix Electro, it's just a damage buffing over time. Well, we now have the numbers for the intensified reaction for Electro, and I decided I wanted to see how good this reaction is, specifically for our criminally underpowered Electro EM scaling queen, Yae Miko. But before I get into that, it's time to beg. If you do end up liking this video, I hope you consider liking and subscribing to my channel, as it helps me out a lot and will help me make more content for the future. And then one last thing, all builds shown in this video are hyper invested unless stated otherwise. The builds in this video are nigh impossible to achieve. This is because I'd rather show their peak than just average. Also, there is a high likelihood that I am completely wrong in this video due to a lack of either understanding and or available information relating to the intensified reaction. If this is the case, if I do end up being wrong, I will be making more videos updating the newly learned facts for the Dendro reactions. Okay, now back to the good stuff. Dendro is the long-awaited final element yet to be added into Genshin, but so far it's not as hype as it could have been. Dendro is, at least at this point in time, only bringing in two new reactions in Overgrown when paired with Hydro and Intensified when paired with Electro, one of which is the subject of this video. Intensified is the reaction that occurs when Electro and Dendro meet. When one element is applied first, the second element applied will proc the reaction, granting all characters able to deal the damage of the first element a base damage bonus buff. So if Electro is applied first and then Dendro procs the reaction, Electro is the one that gains the damage bonus. The same goes the other way around. If Dendro is the first and Electro is second, then Dendro will gain the base damage bonus buff. I'm going to assume that the base damage bonus buff will be for all sources of Electro and Dendro damage, so it will work somewhat like a Shenhe buff. I'm assuming that it does this with all sources of damage too, instead of just transformative reactions or base character damage, since I think it would be just a bad move to buff Electro Charge, Swirl, and Overgrown instead of Electro, and I think the reaction would be lackluster if the latter was true as well. I think that if either is true, the Dendro element would be so limited in application even more than it seems right now. Back to the facts. This base damage bonus buff is based on the first element character's levels and elemental mastery, gaining more benefit from the former. This reaction is very strong because it is a base damage bonus increase, and since it scales with elemental mastery, certain EM scaling Electro characters are going to see quite a thick buff with this. Or will they? There are two characters in Genshin that scale with elemental mastery and are Electro. Those two characters are Kuki Shinobu and Yae Miko. Since Kuki is not yet available in the game, at least at the time of recording in this video, let's focus on Yae Miko at the moment, but don't worry, Kuki will be on the horizon. Yae Miko's EM scaling is on her Ascension 4 passive, which grants her elemental skill a 0.15% damage bonus based on her elemental mastery, which is not a lot of extra damage if I'm being honest. But with the new intensified reaction, she will hopefully be getting a lot of increased damage. Okay, let's not stay hopeful now. You saw the thumbnail. Yae Miko's damage right now is not the greatest, and she does not use any of her Ascension 4 passive at all because it's just not worth building into. Instead, she is paired with Raiden and is run as a clunky mess of a burst DPS character as she shines literally nowhere else. So with this in mind, let's see our constant build. Here she has a Refinement 1 Kagura's Rarity and a 4-piece Emblem of Sever Fate set. Her stat total is 2,198 attack, 46 EM, 98.1% crit rate, 217.3% crit damage, 184.9% energy recharge, and a 58.6 electro damage bonus. It's a lot of stats, I know. Her damage numbers are the max for an entire duration, so she will place her skill down 3 times and never again. And her burst will strike for all 4 of its hits. I added her total damage to make everything easier to compare. Speaking of comparing, let's start. The first comparison is obviously just against her damage right now compared to her damage when the intensified buff is active. All stats are the exact same and nothing was switched around. Her elemental skill gained the most damage increase at about 38%, whereas her burst only gained about an 11% damage increase from before. All around, it's about a 25% damage increase compared to what she would deal before. With her new build, her skill is also dealing 5.3% more damage of her total damage. This boost in damage is actually quite a great increase and it impacts her viability quite a bit. But is it worth to actually fully build into elemental mastery on your Yae Miko? Well, let's test. For this build, all I did was swap her attack substats and her attack percent main stat on her sands with Elemental Mastery. All other stats are the same. As you can see, it doesn't change much. The total damage difference between the full attack damage build for her compared to a full Elemental Mastery build for her is quite small, as the EM build has a higher damage output, but only by 2.5%. So there's really no difference in the single target damage outputs between the two builds. But then again, that's just single target where her skill is best. On the other hand, her burst can easily hit multiple enemies. So what if there are 2 enemies involved? Well, then attack wins by about 5.9%. But this is still also just with a full emblem of Severed Fate set. So we are not leaning into her skill damage as much as we could be. So now let's do one last final comparison between these two builds. These two builds will be her current meta build at the moment with Intensified applied, and a full skill build after Intensified as well. Her skill build will consist of a 2-piece Shiminawa Gladiator Vermilion and Echoes, plus a 2-piece Thundering Fury. In total, Yae Miko has 1705 attack, 513 EM, 98.1% crit rate, 217.3% crit damage, 113% energy recharge, and 73.6% electro damage bonus. Her damage numbers are on screen now, as are the damage numbers for her current build. As you can see, it's quite the intense difference, even when considering 2 enemies being struck by her burst. The elemental skill build is triumphant in this comparison, even when comparing a full rotation of these 2 builds, where her skill is up constantly between bursts, and she hits 3 enemies with her burst for each, her skill build still wins. However, in this situation, it is not by too much, as it's only about a 12% damage increase. There are situations where her current build is better. In any situation outside of Intensified with the Widsith and with groups of enemies are all examples of these situations. There are also issues with Yae Miko's energy regeneration, as she most likely will not have enough energy to consistently use her burst. To be fair, the only time that a full skill build will outright be better than her current build is against fewer enemies, up to about 3 or 4, and with Intensified. Her build despite this will not change, and I honest to god don't even think it's worth to consider changing. The main damage difference between these builds is only about 12%, which is a good portion. However, the time and investment required to get good artifacts from the Thundering Fury domain is a lot. The reward is also incredibly minor, as no one in the game other than Yae, Fischl, and Keqing would ever use this set, turning any extra good pieces into junk. And the other set is just no one's best in slot, so you'll waste a lot of resources farming the domain for literally no reason. Then there's the Widsith, which is a great option on her and also incentivizes a burst build due to its limited time passive, and her skill not snapshotting buffs. While you will still see a good return on skill damage because of this passive, Widsith's uptime will mostly be for setting up her burst, where the passive disappears soon after. Instead, you can think of Intensified as just a good 25% damage buff, which is actually a really nutty buff. Before moving on, I want to talk a bit more about Yae Miko, specifically how she works now with Oathsworn. Oathsworn Eye grants her attack and energy recharge, which are 2 of the 5 stats she really needs along with Elemental Mastery and Crit. So how good is this weapon now? What's her best build with this weapon and Intensified? Well, I'm going to make this one quick and simple. It don't matter. Both builds basically have the same damage output. The build that is better is the full burst damage build, but that's only by literally 0.1%. So it's best to just keep her current build. Now you may be asking yourself, this sounds like just some Yae Miko buffs, but this video advertised that she will be getting nerfed. Calm down, I'm getting to it. I was going to talk about Intensified's impact on Kuki Shinobu, but I guess that'll have to wait for later. So Yae Miko's nerfs. Let's talk about them. Fischl, how you doing girl? Single-handedly carrying taser comps since beta IC? Yep, that's right, it's Fischl. Before I explain why, let's take a look at her numbers and how we can expect Fischl's damage output to change when it comes to Intensified. Like Yae Miko, the Osvaldo here is built to Rambo while holding a stringless. At the moment, Oz is dealing about 14k damage with his normal pellets, 4.5k damage with his Ascension 4 passive strikes, and about 2k damage with his Constellation 6. These damage numbers are all per pellet that he fires, as calculating his total damage would be a pain in the butt, since it all just depends on how many reactions you proc and how fast your character attacks. However, when Intensified is procced, Oz's damage skyrockets. The initial pellets damage have increased by about 51%. The Ascension 4 strikes have increased by about 120%. And finally, the damage of the C6 for this character increases by a whopping 300%. 320%, which, fun fact, showed as 4.20 on my calculator. But what does this finding mean? Well, we have found out two things. One is that Fischl does gain a greater damage bonus than Yae Miko. This is because the flat damage bonus that Intensified grants is always the same. Our second finding is that this reaction in almost every single scenario scales harder off of fast Electro and Dendro application. This means that characters like Fischl and Venti will be getting largely buffed from this, as other characters like Keqing, Beidou, Lisa, and most importantly, Kuki Shinobu. This basically means that Yae Miko's impact as a character has just plummeted. Yae Miko is a 5-star character with many issues, but with a strong and solid kit in the right situation. She has split scaling with attack, elemental mastery, and with her best in slot artifact set, energy recharge as well. She has a really great damage output split between her skill and burst, but she requires a lot of energy recharge to keep her own burst up. She is also pretty clunky and requires a lot of on-field time to use, almost equal to that of a main DPS. Fischl, on the other hand, is a 4-star unit who is able to about match Yae Miko's damage output at C6, but with basically no downside. She only scales with attack, she is not burst reliant in the slightest, as her main damage comes from her elemental skill. She regenerates energy for your entire team, her elemental application is insane, and she also takes almost no time on field. On top of that, Fischl gains more passive scaling instead of the active scaling you get from stats, as she deals more damage the faster your active character attacks. Yae Miko has only really found a place in mono electro teams at the moment that consist of Raiden, Kujo Sara, and a support buffer like Bennett, Kazuha, or Kokomi. Fischl finds herself working in a lot more comps like Electrocharged with a Eula, with Yoimiya, and Sukokomon, as well as being perfectly viable in a mono electro team as well. These major buffs to Fischl plummet the pull value of Yae Miko, which is the nerf I mentioned before. With Intensified, Fischl completely outskills Yae in almost every single regard, to the point where there is literally no reason to pull for this 5-star queen other than the like factor. The other thing that Yae has over Fischl is that she can easily apply Electro to multiple enemies on her own. However, Fischl's damage is more controllable, and I don't know about you, but I prefer to control my damage and application rather than it being RNG based. And if you're looking for random Electro application, just choose Beidou, as she would be better at it while also giving control to the player. Her C2 also just allows her to outscale Yae's damage due to the amount of times it procs, and her Electro application would be better too. The only situation where she would be better than Fischl is if the base damage addition occurs before the talent multiplier is taken into account. This would put more incentive on already high damage characters like Raiden, Sara, and Beidou instead of the fast attacking ones. Yae Miko's idiotically high talent multipliers would allow her to scale specifically only with EM instead of attack. But if this is the case, then EM is not going to be good for Kuki Shinobu, who, in my opinion, needs the buff more. Speaking of, let's talk about the other Electro Elemental Mastery scaling character in the game, Kuki Shinobu. Does she benefit from Intensified at all? Well, to put it simply, at this point in time, Kuki Shinobu is worse than the flavor of sucking on your grandmother's maxi pad, as her only benefits to the team are small healing, max uptime tenacity buffing, easy Favonia's proccing, and mediocre burst damage. While with Intensified, though it may not impact her skill too much, her bursts will be receiving a major increase in damage. So let's talk numbers. Upon release, Kuki's burst will deal at max about 82k damage. However, when Intensified is introduced, her burst shoots up in damage by about 69% percent. It's pretty freaking crazy. She's definitely one of the best characters in the game that uses Intensified, and on top of that, her skill is also getting a flat increase to healing and damage too. So it's just all around nice to have on her. But her skill doesn't scale too well with it, so it's mainly her burst. Intensified also scales mostly with level, so I have to ask the question, at what point is too much EM on her and everyone else who scales with Intensified too? Well, lucky for us all, no, that's not lucky. I calculated this and put together an entire chart. On the left is the elemental mastery that Kuki has scaling up by the hundreds. I calculated the difference between level 80 and level 92 because most people will have her only at 80 instead, since it costs way too much to level up to 90. But I wanted to show the difference that this makes in her total damage, which I will tell you now is about a 20% damage increase based specifically on level. As you can see, EM has less of an impact on her than plain level does, but it still makes up for a good amount of damage. The point where it seems to reach heavier diminishing returns is at about 300 elemental mastery, as it starts plateauing after that. But technically, you can go beyond. I would say the hard limit would be about between 500 and 600 elemental mastery, and the what the fuck are you doing point is at 800 and beyond. The minor limit of up to 300 is pretty easy to reach on her, especially with her C6. Her C6 grants her an extra 150 EM, and it has barely any uptime to it, so I still recommend building some on her. An elemental mastery sands would grant her an entire 187 EM, meaning she would have 237 EM with her C6 active. With just the sands, an iron sting would have Kuki at 352 EM, and the freedom sworn would put her at 385 EM, both of which reach the plateau zone for intensified. Instead, I would recommend choosing between weapon and sands, then getting more EM from artifacts, or just focusing on her C6 since you won't be losing much without the active buff. But which one should you choose? Well, I wanted to take a look at it myself. Should you focus on an elemental mastery sands or an HP percent one? With intensified, Kuki's burst with an HP percent sands versus an elemental mastery sands leans in EM's direction by about 10%, which isn't crazy, but it can make the difference. With her C6 active, the gap closes with even more to about 5%, still leaning in EM's direction. With the minimum amount of substat rolls for each artifact on top of everything else, EM still takes the lead, but this time only by 1.6%. Since her healing is barely impacted by EM, you will be getting a lot more out of HP at this point, so hard cap would be 500 EM, as any more beyond this would go to HP. Still, the goal is to reach around that 200 to 300 EM threshold, which can be pretty easily achieved with her C6 and some substats. Doing this is better for her anyways, since she will benefit a lot less from EM in other team comps, though I don't know why the hell you would want to do that, but you do you, boo-boo. Other characters who benefit largely from Intensified will want to reach this 200 to 300 EM threshold too, if you plan to use them in comps that utilize this reaction. But that's all I have to report for today. If I find out more, I will make an update if this does change things, but otherwise this video will stay. I will also do a video about Overgrown when the information is released, so if you would like to see a video on that, please subscribe and hit that bell icon so you are notified when I post. Also, do comment your thoughts down in the comments below. Do you think I'm wrong? Do you think Intensified will work differently? What are your thoughts about Dendro so far? Tell me. Anyways, that'll do it for today. Thank you all so much for watching my video, and I hope to see you all next time. Bye bye!